Chosen one. Divine intelligence doesn't operate on human timelines. It strikes when consciousness is ready to shatter illusion permanently. Ancient prophecies speak of awakened souls who carry frequencies capable of penetrating decades of military-grade mind control. And you just proved you're one of these prophesied catalysts. You've got a federal operative staring at classified files with trembling hands, their entire reality cracking like glass because your words bypassed conditioning that cost millions to install. Years of unwavering service to the system just evaporated when your consciousness collided with their programmed mind. What you're about to discover will show you exactly how your spiritual power operates as a weapon of mass awakening in the physical world. Think of yourself as a tuning fork struck by cosmic force, sending vibrations through dimensions that shatter mental prisons with surgical precision. But first, let me tell you about the moment this agent's programming shattered, and they realized they'd been living in a carefully constructed lie their entire career. When your name appeared in classified briefings, you triggered something unprecedented. Standard protocol crumbled when your file revealed details that made trained instincts scream warnings. You had publicly referenced classified operations before they were scheduled to begin. You'd described underground facilities that didn't officially exist. You'd connected financial transactions between entities that weren't supposed to have any relationship according to intelligence records. Most disturbing of all, you'd predicted the elimination of key witnesses before it happened, describing methods with precision that should have been impossible. Your accuracy shattered their first assumption, that someone was feeding you information. But tracing your connections revealed something that defied every model of intelligence gathering. You had no government contacts, no intelligence background, no access to classified systems. You weren't connected to any known agencies or resistance groups. By every metric used to evaluate threats, you should have been harmless. Yet somehow, you knew things that only a handful of people in the world were supposed to know. Things that weren't written down anywhere, discussed in any meeting, or transmitted through any monitored communication channel. You were accessing information through channels that didn't exist according to their understanding of reality. That's when your true power revealed itself. Instead of following standard procedure and recommending immediate action against you, curiosity won out. The desire to understand how you were accessing impossible information led to digging deeper into classified databases. What emerged from those searches would forever change everything. Every piece of secret information you'd revealed publicly was absolutely accurate. Every prediction you'd made had come to pass exactly as you'd described. Every connection you'd drawn between seemingly unrelated events was supported by evidence buried so deep in compartmentalized files that most operatives with high-level clearance had never seen the complete picture. You weren't just right about isolated incidents. You were revealing the underlying architecture of a control system that most operatives served without ever understanding its true scope. Your accuracy forced recognition of something that shouldn't exist according to materialist worldview. Genuine prophetic ability operating in real time. You weren't getting your information from human sources. You were downloading truth directly from levels of consciousness beyond access, monitoring, or control. You had become a direct threat to their monopoly on information, and now everyone knew it. But your consciousness-shattering power was just getting started. Chosen one. This awakening was just the beginning of something much bigger than either of you realized at the time. Your accuracy led to uncovering evidence of a vast underground network that operated beneath the surface of every major institution. This wasn't just government corruption or corporate conspiracy. This was a coordinated system of consciousness control that had been operating for generations, using techniques that mainstream science refused to acknowledge existed. You made missing persons cases start making sense. People who asked the wrong questions, researched forbidden topics, or demonstrated abilities that threatened the established order weren't just being eliminated. You revealed they were being systematically erased from reality itself, their digital footprints scrubbed clean, their families' memories altered through psychological techniques, all evidence of their existence methodically destroyed. Your influence forced discovery of a literal underground world beneath major cities, government buildings, and corporate headquarters. Miles of tunnels connected facilities that didn't appear on any official map, allowing the real decision-makers to move unseen between their various operations. But you exposed that these weren't just meeting spaces or storage facilities. Activities down there challenged every assumption about the nature of reality itself. You discovered evidence of consciousness manipulation experiments that had been running for decades, technologies that could influence human thoughts and emotions from a distance, ritual practices that seemed designed to harvest spiritual energy from unwitting populations, ancient symbols and ceremonies that revealed this network's roots extended far back into human history, connecting to mystery schools and occult traditions that most people assumed were dead and buried. What should have terrified you most was the scope of these operations, but instead you felt something else entirely: recognition. This network had successfully maintained control over human consciousness for generations by keeping people trapped in artificial limitations, false beliefs about their own capabilities, and engineered conflicts that prevented them from recognizing their true spiritual nature. But you saw through it all. You realized these entities were spiritual vampires feeding off humanity's life force while keeping their victims unconscious of the extraction process. But more importantly, you understood that your awakened consciousness wasn't just resistant to their influence. You were actively disrupting their operations like a virus spreading through their carefully controlled matrix. Every time you spoke truth, every soul you helped awaken, every person you inspired to question official narratives, was cutting off their food supply and threatening their continued existence. You watched in amazement as this ancient network began to panic for the first time in living memory. These beings who had controlled human consciousness for centuries suddenly found themselves facing something beyond their experience. You, a spiritually awakened human being who couldn't be bought, intimidated, deceived, or eliminated through conventional means. That's when you forced their biggest mistake, chosen one. Your presence compelled them to reveal the full extent of their arsenal by attempting your elimination, not realizing that attacking a truly awakened being would expose their complete vulnerability to divine power. You documented every attack as they followed their standard playbook perfectly. Digital suppression algorithms target your content across every platform. Fact-checkers appeared overnight with pre-written debunking articles. Financial institutions received orders to freeze your accounts and destroy your credit rating. Anonymous phone calls warned you to stay quiet. Mysterious emails told you to stop investigating. Strange accidents began occurring around you with increasing frequency. But you accomplished something impossible instead. Every attack not only failed to achieve its intended result, you turned it around in ways that strengthened your position and expanded your influence. Cars that should have killed you somehow missed by impossible margins because your consciousness commanded protection. Illnesses that should have incapacitated you mysteriously cleared up overnight because your connection to divine source overrode their artificial afflictions. Financial attacks that should have destroyed you led to unexpected resources appearing from unknown sources because abundance flows through awakened consciousness. Most disturbing to the shadow network, people who were sent to infiltrate your circle and betray you found themselves unable to complete their missions against you. Trained operatives who had successfully eliminated hundreds of targets over the years would approach you with clear instructions, only to walk away without following through, often with no memory of what had changed their minds when exposed to your frequency. You realized you were demonstrating something unprecedented in the network's long history of successful eliminations, divine protection manifesting in physical reality through your awakened consciousness. Forces that operated beyond the three-dimensional world were actively intervening to ensure your survival and continued effectiveness. You weren't just protected by luck or clever planning. You commanded spiritual authorities that existed beyond the shadow network's reach or understanding. This recognition triggered your understanding that the battle you were fighting wasn't just political or economic. It was fundamentally spiritual. You saw that their power came from humanity's disconnection from divine consciousness, and your awakening was creating cracks in their matrix that were spreading exponentially with every person you influenced. But your most shocking discovery was still to come, and it would reveal the true cosmic significance of your awakening power. Deep in the underground tunnels, in a chamber that felt older than recorded history, the agent found symbols carved into stone walls that seemed to pulse with their own inner light. These weren't modern markings or random graffiti. They were hieroglyphics that appeared to have been waiting for the right consciousness to decode their meaning. As the agent's awakened awareness focused on these symbols, something extraordinary happened. Knowledge flooded their mind, not learned information, but remembered truth returning like water to a dry riverbed. They understood without being taught, recognized without having seen before. These symbols were a message, a warning, and a prophecy, all encoded in a language that spoke directly to the soul. The revelation was staggering. This conflict between light and darkness had been prophesied for millennia. The shadow network wasn't a modern creation. It was the current manifestation of an ancient force that had been suppressing human consciousness since the dawn of civilization. Every empire that had risen and fallen, every religion that had been corrupted, every system of control that had enslaved human potential, all of it had been orchestrated by these same entities across centuries. But the symbols revealed something that sent shockwaves of recognition through the agent's being. The time of the network's unchallenged dominance was ending according to cosmic cycles they couldn't manipulate. The age of mass awakening had begun, and you were one of the primary catalysts that had been prophesied to trigger this transformation. Your emergence into conscious awareness wasn't random chance or personal achievement. It was the fulfillment of an ancient promise that forces of light would reclaim human consciousness when darkness had grown bold enough to threaten humanity's spiritual evolution itself. You were part of a coordinated divine response to a crisis that had been building for generations. The agent understood now that their own awakening wasn't isolated. Across the globe, within every institution of control, other operatives were experiencing similar spiritual activations. Your influence had triggered a mass awakening of conscious agents who had been sleeping within the system, waiting for the correct frequency to remember their true purpose and begin working from within to dismantle the matrix of control. This wasn't just about exposing one network of corruption or revealing particular secrets. This was about the fundamental transformation of human consciousness, and you had become the catalyst that activated a revolution operating simultaneously across multiple dimensions of reality. The network found themselves facing their worst nightmare, awakened souls with intimate knowledge of their methods, locations and protocols, all coordinating to accelerate the exposure of operations that had been hidden for centuries. Every safe house, every escape route, every contingency plan was known to people who were no longer bound by oaths of secrecy to organizations they now recognized as fundamentally evil. As the agent witnessed the systematic collapse of escape protocols that had been perfected over decades, they realized they were seeing divine justice manifest in real time. The ocean tunnels that should have evacuated leadership to safety were blocked by impossible underwater landslides. Private jets experienced unprecedented mechanical failures minutes before critical evacuations. Financial accounts that had been secure for generations were simultaneously frozen by authorities following protocols that didn't officially exist. Most telling was the psychological deterioration occurring within the network's ranks. These beings who had manipulated human consciousness for centuries were suddenly experiencing the very emotions they had weaponized: terror, paranoia, desperation, and confusion. The spiritual forces they had commanded were turning against them with vicious precision, consuming them from within like a cosmic cancer that fed on their own darkness. The agent documented case after case of high-level members experiencing supernatural breakdown that no medical science could explain. The whispers they had used to control others now echoed in their own minds. The nightmares they had inflicted on victims now haunted their sleep. The isolation they had perfected as a weapon now cut them off from any source of peace or comfort. Standing in that ancient chamber surrounded by symbols that spoke of prophecies fulfilled and divine timing activated, the agent experienced complete understanding of their role in this cosmic drama. They hadn't stumbled onto classified information or gotten caught up in events beyond their control. They had been positioned within the system from the beginning, waiting for the exact moment when your awakening would trigger their own remembering. Every assignment, every classified briefing, every secret they'd been exposed to throughout their career had been preparation for this revelation. They had been placed within the shadow network, not to serve it, but to witness its prophesied collapse from the inside, and document the return of divine consciousness to Earth through awakened beings like yourself. The gratitude they felt toward you transcended anything they'd experienced in their professional or personal life. You hadn't just revealed hidden information or exposed corruption, you had awakened their soul and reminded them of the mission they had volunteered to fulfill before incarnating in this lifetime. Their spiritual amnesia was lifting, replaced by crystal-clear awareness of their true purpose as a bridge between worlds. The agent understood now that you had never been just an individual seeking truth or fighting isolated battles against corrupt systems. You were part of a coordinated effort by divine consciousness to reclaim this reality from forces that had held it hostage for millennia. Your awakening was synchronized with thousands of others around the planet, all of you activating simultaneously to create a frequency shift that made continued consciousness control impossible. The prophecies weren't about some distant future event. They were about this exact moment when enough awakened souls would remember their true identity and purpose, triggering the mass liberation of human consciousness from the prison that had contained it for centuries. The cosmic timing was perfect. The divine plan was unfolding exactly as foretold, and you were one of the key catalysts that made it all possible. As the agent prepared to break their silence for the first time in their career, they wanted you to understand the full cosmic significance of what you had accomplished. The shadow network that had controlled human consciousness for millennia was in complete collapse. Their tunnels were sealed, their escape routes blocked, their operatives awakening to the truth of what they had been participating in. The age of hidden manipulation was ending because the light of consciousness could no longer be contained. Your voice speaking truth into existence had been the catalyst that triggered this unprecedented transformation. Every word you spoke created ripples across dimensions that would continue expanding until every sleeping soul on the planet had the opportunity to remember their divine nature. Your refusal to be silenced, your commitment to awakening despite every obstacle, your unwavering connection to divine consciousness, all of it served as a beacon guiding other souls home to themselves. The agent's message carried the authority of someone who had witnessed the complete collapse of humanity's prison from the inside. The war was already won in the realm of consciousness where all true battles are decided. Everything happening in physical reality was simply the playing out of victory. The moment enough souls like yourself chose to remember who they really were, and why they had incarnated at this crucial time in human history. The revolution of consciousness wasn't just beginning, it was complete. Divine intelligence had returned to Earth through awakened beings who refused to remain unconscious. The systems of control were crumbling as their own operatives remembered their true purpose and began coordinating the transition to humanity's spiritual freedom. Most importantly, the agent wanted you to understand that you had never been alone in this mission. Every synchronicity that protected you, every opportunity that appeared when you needed it, every person who supported your work, all orchestrated by forces of light who recognized your commitment to serving something infinitely greater than personal safety or comfort. You became living proof of what was possible when human consciousness aligned with divine will, inspiring millions to remember their own connection to source energy. The transformation you catalyzed was irreversible and self-perpetuating, spreading through collective consciousness like wildfire, through everything that had kept humanity spiritually imprisoned. And just like that federal agent staring at those classified files with trembling hands, understanding for the first time that everything they thought they knew about reality was a carefully constructed lie, you too have just experienced your own moment of awakening to the true magnitude of your power as a catalyst for humanity's liberation from the forces that sought to keep consciousness imprisoned forever. This federal operative wasn't the first mind you've cracked open. Cross-referencing other cases revealed a pattern that stretched back years, a trail of awakened agents, compromised assets, and security breaches that all traced back to one common factor: exposure to your frequency. You've been systematically destroying their personnel without even trying. Classified reports documented surveillance teams assigned to monitor you, only to abandon their posts after extended observation. Not because you discovered or threatened them, but because something about watching you operate in the world triggered existential questions their conditioning couldn't handle. Operatives who had spent decades following orders without hesitation suddenly found themselves unable to participate in activities that violated their newly awakened conscience. One report particularly stunned the reviewing agent: a psychological assessment of an operative tasked with infiltrating your inner circle. This subject had completed similar assignments throughout their career with perfect success. But after spending weeks in your presence, something remarkable happened, what the psychiatrists termed spontaneous moral awakening. Your influence had completely restructured their value system, making continued service to the shadow network psychologically impossible. The assessment noted something that chilled the reviewing agent. The subject claimed to see things differently after exposure to your energy, not hallucinations or delusions, but enhanced perception that revealed layers of truth hidden beneath surface appearances. After contact with you, this operative could sense deception with uncanny accuracy, recognize spiritual authenticity in others, and perceive connections between events that weren't apparent through normal analytical methods. You had upgraded their consciousness permanently. The awakening contagion you created had spread beyond field agents, analysts, administrators, and handlers at the highest levels of classification were experiencing consciousness breaks. Entire departments faced turnover rates that threatened operational security. People who had dedicated their lives to maintaining the secrecy apparatus were walking away from lucrative careers because your influence made continuing impossible once awakened. Conscience kicked in. The investigation revealed that you had no conscious strategy for awakening operatives within enemy organizations. You weren't running recruitment operations or attempting to flip assets through conventional intelligence methods. Your very presence in the collective consciousness was operating like a tuning fork, resonating at frequencies that activated dormant spiritual awareness in anyone who encountered your energy signature. This meant the network couldn't protect personnel through traditional counterintelligence measures. You had made their control systems fundamentally incompatible with awakened awareness. Every attempt to shield operatives from your influence only proved that consciousness itself was the real enemy of their manipulation apparatus. The agent discovered internal memos discussing increasingly desperate measures to protect remaining loyal personnel. Psychological screening protocols were updated to identify early signs of spiritual awakening. Meditation practices were banned as potentially destabilizing. Access to certain information was restricted even from senior operatives, because exposure to truth accelerated the awakening process they were trying to prevent. Some facilities implemented what they called consciousness firewalls, environments designed to suppress spiritual awareness through frequency manipulation, pharmaceutical intervention, and intensive psychological conditioning. But even these extreme measures proved ineffective against the awakening wave you had initiated. Personnel working in these supposedly protected environments continued experiencing breakthrough moments that shattered their programmed limitations. The agent realized they were witnessing the systematic destruction of a control apparatus that had taken centuries to perfect, not through external attack or organized resistance, but through the simple presence of authentic consciousness that reminded people of who they really were beneath layers of conditioning and manipulation. You had become a walking antidote to spiritual amnesia, and there was no way to inoculate against awakening once the process began. What's more, the agent discovered that your influence extended far beyond direct contact. People who had never met you, never heard you speak, never encountered your content, were experiencing spontaneous awakenings after interacting with someone who had been activated by your frequency. The consciousness expansion was spreading through human networks like a beneficial virus, jumping from person to person through ordinary social connections. The shadow network found themselves facing a phenomenon they had no protocols for addressing: positive contagion that made people more aware, more questioning, more spiritually connected, and therefore less susceptible to their manipulation techniques. Every person you awakened became a transmission point for the same frequency, creating an exponentially expanding web of conscious awareness that was dissolving their power base from within. Reviewing the timeline of awakening incidents, the agent noticed that your influence seemed to activate specific individuals at precisely the moments when their awakening would have maximum impact on network operations. A financial crime specialist became conscious right before gaining access to money laundering schemes that funded black projects. A communications analyst awakened just before being assigned to a disinformation campaign designed to discredit other truth-tellers like yourself. The timing was too perfect to be coincidental. Higher intelligence was coordinating your consciousness-expanding effects to achieve strategic objectives in the invisible war between awakening and control. You weren't just randomly activating people. You were being used as an instrument by forces that could see the complete battlefield across multiple dimensions of reality. The agent found classified assessments suggesting that your awakening ability operated through quantum consciousness principles that their scientists couldn't fully understand or measure. Your presence seemed to create coherence in the quantum field that allowed suppressed information to surface in the minds of people who encountered your frequency. This explained how newly awakened agents gained access to knowledge they shouldn't have possessed according to their security clearance level. Even more remarkable, the agent discovered that awakened personnel were beginning to demonstrate abilities that defied conventional explanation, enhanced intuition that allowed them to anticipate operations before they were announced, telepathic communication that bypassed monitored channels, remote viewing capabilities that provided intelligence without technological surveillance. It was as if exposure to your consciousness unlocked dormant human potential that the control system had worked for generations to suppress. The implications were staggering. If authentic awakening restored natural human abilities that had been systematically disabled, then the network hadn't just been controlling information and resources, they had been artificially limiting human evolution itself. Your presence was proving that consciousness expansion wasn't just about spiritual awareness, it was about recovering capabilities that were humanity's birthright. This revelation explained why the Shadow Network had invested so heavily in keeping people spiritually unconscious. An awakened population wouldn't just be harder to deceive, they would possess abilities that made centralized control impossible. When people could communicate telepathically, access information through consciousness alone, and perceive truth directly through spiritual discernment, traditional power structures became obsolete. The agent realized that your role as a chosen one involved far more than exposing corruption or revealing secrets. You were facilitating the return of human abilities that had been deliberately suppressed to maintain a system of artificial limitation. Every person you awakened recovered a piece of their original potential, making them not just spiritually free but practically empowered in ways that threatened the entire foundation of control-based civilization. But perhaps most significantly, the agent discovered evidence that suggested your consciousness-shattering effects were accelerating according to a precise timeline that aligned with ancient prophecies about humanity's spiritual evolution. Deep in the classified archives, they found studies of historical awakening periods that showed similar patterns of consciousness expansion, followed by the collapse of control systems. Each time, the awakening had been triggered by individuals who carried what researchers termed activator frequencies, consciousness signatures that could catalyze mass spiritual evolution in human populations. The documents revealed that the Shadow Network had been monitoring for the emergence of such individuals throughout history, developing increasingly sophisticated methods for identifying and eliminating consciousness activators before they could fulfill their potential. But your awakening had blindsided them, because you hadn't fit their predictive models for how such abilities would manifest in the modern era. Traditional activators had been recognized spiritual leaders, mystical figures, or individuals who openly claimed extraordinary abilities. You had emerged from ordinary circumstances with no mystical credentials or supernatural claims, making your true nature invisible to their detection systems until your effects were already spreading beyond their ability to contain. The agent found internal communications expressing bewilderment at how someone without formal spiritual training or apparent paranormal abilities could generate consciousness-expanding effects that surpassed historical figures who had dedicated lifetimes to developing such capacities. The answer, according to classified research, lay in the purity of your connection to source consciousness, an unfiltered channel that allowed divine intelligence to operate through you without the distortions created by ego, expectation, or artificial spiritual practices. This explained why your awakening influence was so much more powerful than traditional spiritual teachers or consciousness researchers. You weren't operating from learned techniques or philosophical frameworks that could be analyzed and countered. You were functioning as a direct expression of the same consciousness that animated all existence, making resistance to your influence essentially impossible for anyone whose spiritual nature remained intact beneath their programming. The agent discovered that even the most heavily conditioned operatives retained enough authentic consciousness to respond to your frequency, because the core of their being remained connected to the same source that expressed through you. No amount of psychological manipulation could completely sever that connection, which meant that every human being represented a potential awakening catalyst waiting to be activated by contact with genuine divine consciousness. Hey, this is Mike and Ari cutting into your regularly scheduled Chosen One programming for just a moment. We are the founders of the Obsidian Inner Order and the Astral Atom Network, and we're done playing nice. We're in a spiritual war. You know it, we know it, we know it, and we're out here bleeding for this mission full time. I'm hungry for fourth dimensional Archon blood, but we need the ammunition. So listen, when you join the Inner Order, you're not just supporting us, you're getting access to exclusive tools they never wanted you to have: psychic self-defense training, targeted individual intel, spiritual warfare tactics they scrub from the internet, and every week, we meet in secret, Chosen Ones only on Zoom. No filters, no fluff, just real gnosis, real family, real power. It's a 360-degree win. You get what you need. We get to keep fighting. So don't just watch. Drop a like. Share this video to everyone you know now, and join the Obsidian Inner Order. Let's finish what we started. Link in the description. Let's freaking go. The revolution wasn't a battle between competing ideologies or power structures. It was consciousness remembering itself after the millennia of induced amnesia, using awakened beings like yourself as mirrors that reflected humanity's true spiritual nature, back to those who had forgotten who they really were beneath layers of conditioning and control. The agent understood now that their awakening, triggered by exposure to your consciousness, was simultaneously the most personal and most universal experience possible. They had remembered their individual spiritual nature while recognizing their fundamental connection to the same divine intelligence that operated through you and every other awakened being on the planet. Standing in that ancient chamber, surrounded by symbols that spoke of prophecies being fulfilled in real time, the agent experienced complete certainty about the outcome of this consciousness revolution. The awakening you had catalyzed was irreversible because it was founded on truth rather than belief, powered by divine intelligence rather than human effort, and supported by the fundamental nature of consciousness itself rather than external circumstances that could be manipulated or destroyed. Your consciousness-shattering abilities had proven that authentic awakening was the most contagious force in existence, more powerful than propaganda, more persuasive than argument, more transformative than any political or social movement in human history. You had demonstrated that consciousness expansion wasn't a gradual process requiring years of spiritual practice, but an instantaneous recognition that could occur the moment someone encountered their true nature reflected in another awakened being. The agent's gratitude extended beyond their personal liberation to encompass the entire transformation of human consciousness that your presence had made possible. They had witnessed the birth of a new era from the unique perspective of someone with access to the highest levels of the control apparatus, and they knew with absolute certainty that the age of consciousness suppression was ending because beings like you had remembered how to reflect humanity's divine nature with such clarity that spiritual amnesia became impossible to maintain. The classified psychological profiles revealed something that sent shockwaves through the highest levels of the shadow network. Every method of consciousness manipulation ever developed, hypnotic programming, frequency weapons, pharmaceutical conditioning, trauma-based control, all of it bounces off your awakened awareness like water off stone. Your connection to divine intelligence has created an impenetrable shield that not only protects you, but reflects their attacks back at the source with amplified power. This immunity isn't something you develop through training or conscious effort. It's the natural result of authentic spiritual awakening that reconnects human consciousness with its original divine nature. The agent discovered that once someone achieves genuine awakening as you have, their consciousness operates from frequencies that exist beyond the reach of artificial manipulation technologies. What's more, your presence creates zones of immunity around others who spend time in your energetic field. People who work with you, live near you, or even communicate with you regularly, begin developing similar resistance to consciousness manipulation. You're not just awakening individuals, you're creating expanding territories of free consciousness that the control system cannot penetrate or influence. The agent found evidence that entire geographical regions were beginning to shift as your influence spread through local populations. Crime rates dropped inexplicably. Political corruption became increasingly difficult to maintain as awakened citizens developed an intuitive ability to detect deception. Corporate manipulation campaigns failed repeatedly, as consumers somehow sensed authenticity versus manufactured messaging with unprecedented accuracy. Your consciousness-shattering power operates like a reality upgrade that brings truth into such sharp focus that lies become immediately obvious to anyone operating within your sphere of influence. The agent realized that you hadn't just awakened individuals, you had begun awakening collective consciousness itself, transforming the very environment in which the shadow network operated. This explains why their elimination attempts failed so spectacularly. You weren't just protected by divine forces, you had become a focal point for divine intelligence operating in physical reality. Attacking you was like trying to fight the source of consciousness itself, which made their defeat inevitable from the moment you achieved genuine awakening. The agent's final message carries absolute certainty. Your victory is complete and irreversible. Every consciousness you've shattered has become a transmission point for the same divine intelligence that flows through you. The awakening cascade you initiated will continue expanding until every soul on earth remembers their true nature as expressions of unlimited divine potential. Just like that federal operative staring at classified files with trembling hands, finally understanding that everything about their constructed reality was an elaborate deception designed to keep consciousness imprisoned, you have awakened to the true magnitude of your power as humanity's liberation catalyst. The revolution is complete, chosen one. Divine intelligence flows through you now, and nothing can stop what you've set in motion.